For decades, the United States has alternated between confrontation and collaboration, frequently applying unfounded, countervailing and anti-dumping duties against Canadian softwood. Let's be clear. Canada does not dump lumber into the United States.
Ottawa is dropping a pair of legal challenges it launched over the United States' decision to slap duties on Canadian softwood lumber.
President Trump raised Canadian softwood lumber tariffs to roughly 35% in August, claiming Canada was dumping cheap wood. The data shows something more complex. 70% of America's softwood lumber imports come from Canada, a decades-old supply chain that supports new home construction and California post-disaster rebuilding. It was not mentioned that the U.S. timber sector cannot soon replenish that flow. Trees exist, but not sawmills or workers. Fox Business Industry Voices predicted it would take 5 to 10 years to grow domestic milling capacity if federal forest access laws were relaxed, which is unlikely.
From the government New Brunswick perspective, that these increase in tariffs and countervailing.
The impact is real. Higher lumber prices could raise construction expenses by 10 to 15%, according to Investopedia analysts. California wildfire-ravaged neighborhoods had higher reconstruction costs, longer wait periods, and fewer options. Even outside catastrophe zones, Texas suburbia and Illinois multifamily developers are revising budgets and timelines. While Trump promised to boost home building to help the housing crisis, these tariffs may make new homes less affordable.
Today, I'm announcing a series of new measures to help the softwood lumber industry pivot to a growing Canadian market and to the markets of reliable trading partners around the world.
Ottawa, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, did not escalate rhetorically. Instead, the government announced more than 1 billion Canadian dollars in softwood industry loan guarantees, diversification grants, and worker programs, including 700 million Canadian dollars for smaller enterprises strained by trade uncertainties. Importantly, the help is related to a new 25 billion Canadian dollars federal home building effort starting this fall, guaranteeing Canadian lumber finds demand at home if U.S. market access tightens.
Whenever anybody in the supply chain hears about duties and tariffs or any other fees, they get very anxious about those fees being imposed on them in the form of lower wood prices and possibly making their operation not viable anymore.
Sweden and Germany lack capacity, and U.S. mills are full, so Washington can't readily switch suppliers. Canada's reaction diversifies sales through trade missions to Vietnam and Japan and expands market access. BC Forestry Minister Ravi Parmar said Americans will pay more for lumber, housing, and building materials due to trade ledgers. A severe trade posture could hurt the U.S. economy. Canadian manufacturers get finance, time, and political cover to change approach. Ottawa is creating transition programs for 6,000 workers to manage change, not collapse. Trump faces pressure from greater costs, disgruntled builders, and rising consumer prices as Canada advances. Canada didn't hesitate, it invested.
Canada right now, due to its CUSMA deal, kind of has a better deal than that already. And so if Canada were to face that 15% tariff across the board, well, that would not be a good deal at all for Canada. And so they're better to take their time and continue to try and effort a deal that will be better for our country.
Canada is creating resilience, and a calmer posture may work better in this impasse if tariffs rise. This happens as Ottawa nears the end of trade discussions with the U.S. Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, threatened sanctions unless Canada opened its market by August 1st. Canada isn't backing down, and softwood could be the chance for an early settlement. Prime Minister Mark Carney is negotiating a modest deal with U.S. senators and Canadian premiers. Ottawa just wants a sector-specific agreement that limits collateral harm and offers some certainty, not a full tariff removal. Old files can be leveraged with softwood lumber. BC has long faced U.S. taxes, but Premier David Eby and others are now publicly considering export caps. Quotas were long forbidden, but with more than $7 billion in softwood taxes in escrow, and discussions tense, lumber is being used as a bargaining chip rather than a victim of U.S. protectionism. Now, why pivot Softwood is a visible cross-border sector with enough political power on both sides to win quickly without harming dairy or autos. The board remains dirty.
Look, we got to be honest with ourselves as Canadians, and I think the Carney government has done a good job at this in its sort of early days. This is Trump's strategy, right? Exactly what you just described. That's what his sort of MO has been really in Trump 2.0 administration. And
Trump's trade policy relies on shifting deadlines, ambiguous requests, and threats to reopen USMCA in 2026, which former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant calls engineered confusion. This time, Canada won't bite. To coordinate with provinces, align federal interests, and expand beyond North America, Carney's administration favors discipline. The answer is subtle but coordinated. Ontario protects automobiles, BC pushes softwood, Quebec seeks time-bound clarification, and Ottawa strengthens the home front with Bill C-5 to simplify internal commerce and a major projects bill to accelerate infrastructure, energy, and mining with Indigenous collaboration. Canada is strengthening connections with Mexico, the EU, and G7 nations. Signal: Washington has another lane. Meanwhile, U.S. costs rise. Softwood taxes are already raising construction costs, especially in Canadian-dependent home markets. A bipartisan group of senators in Ottawa want economic stability. Since pressure increases self-reliance, Canadian industries lose U.S. dependence faster the longer the deadlock lasts. This is more than a commercial dispute. It tests policy, diplomacy, and national unity. Softwood is little, but it now represents keeping ground, making reasonable concessions, and defending sovereignty without shouting.
Here in Canada, over the last number of weeks and months, that Donald Trump is doing everything in his power to destroy our economy.
On August 1st, Trump imposed a 35% tariff on CUSMA non-compliant items from Canada. The move was intended to punish Ottawa for delaying a new arrangement. One sector was spared: Canadian oil. Steel, aluminum, car parts, and copper tubing were included, but crude, which accounts for most U.S. oil imports, was excluded. Canada ships roughly 4 million barrels a day, largely heavy crude processed in the Midwest. So this was no accident. It shows Canada's modest export shift. Over 80% of Canadian exports to the U.S. are still protected by CUSMA, according to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Oil and natural gas, important food products, and many integrated supply chain auto parts are covered. The 50% tariff applies to semi-finished commodities like tubing and wire, although Canada mostly ships cathodes, anodes, and concentrates, which are unaffected. Practice made the copper move sound tougher than it was. Canada avoided the tariff hike by directing flows through CUSMA-compliant categories. Has Ottawa considerable power? Critics say even a capable Prime Minister has fewer alternatives when negotiating with an unstable rival. Political dynamics ensued. Trump linked trade discussions to Canada's policy on recognizing a Palestinian state on Truth Social hours before the deadline. Trade indicators were replaced by geopolitics overnight, suggesting the rules might change midstream. Ottawa may not have a clear path to yes, even if it compromises.
Canada is not open to us. They need to open their market. Unless they're willing to open their market, they're going to pay a tariff.
This is why Prime Minister Carney slowed down. On August 1st, he suggested extending talks past Trump's deadline. Canada wants leverage, not a rapid signing. Under CUSMA provisions, Canada is stronger than deals with South Korea or the EU, currently facing 15% blanket duties, according to Bank of Canada and CTV Ottawa bureau analysts. A Seoul-style copycat transaction could have caused long-term damage. Carney hopes to get fairer terms and protect energy and defense assets over time. Trump wants to appear tough. The 35% figure is huge and headline-friendly, but North American trade fundamentals remain unchanged. Pipelines, uranium, and cross-border electricity grids have kept Canada's exports moving. Ottawa keeps cards. The fundamental question is whether Trump has played his strongest hand, not whether Canada can handle the pressure. Thank you for watching the video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.